of political affiliation or views on the Middle East conflict. The purpose of today's seminar is to encourage honest, intellectually serious and democratic discussion about where the line is crossed between legitimate criticism and the delegitimization of Jewish collective identity. Our speakers bring different academic and intellectual perspectives, but all three of them have devoted significant work to understanding contemporary antisemitism, its ideological roots, and the ways in which language and narratives shape public attitudes. We will soon yield the floor to them, but I would like to first give you a recent example that I know Dr. Christer Mattson is familiar with, of the urgent situation we find ourselves in. A venomous snake bearing a Star of David is about to sink its fangs into a naked infant. Another snake coils itself into the shape of a Star of David around a baby bottle, next to the words, "The Zionist vipers murder children." A hyena wearing a kippah adorned with a Star of David stands with its paw on the body of a dead infant, staring toward the wall behind which its next victim is hiding. These images were posted on TikTok by a woman in Sweden 2 years ago. She was, quite rightfully in my view, prosecuted by Swedish authorities for incitement against an ethnic group. Yet, 2 weeks ago, the district court ruled that the prosecutor had failed to prove her guilt. In summary, because she posted in the context of the conflict in Gaza. Further, the court concluded that these ancient anti-Semitic troops, the Jews portrayed as whippers and other animals attacking defenseless children, cannot be deemed common knowledge in Sweden today. As I wrote this weekend in my latest op-ed, this judgment raises a couple of questions that we must address urgently, in Sweden and elsewhere. For example, how have we allowed the oldest and gravest of anti-Semitic tropes to pass as lawful criticism of the Jewish state? How have our continent, that promised never again, allowed ourselves to fail so fundamentally in educating ourselves? And what can we do moving forward to ensure moral clarity when anti-Semitism appears in new, politically fashionable and rhetorically sophisticated forms? Let me once again stress the grave situation we find ourselves in. And should Europe fail to protect our Jewish communities, we will fail not only our Jewish friends, but Europe itself. Thank you once again for being here today and engaging in this crucial discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice, for your powerful and inspiring words and for all the rightful questions that you have put at the table of this debate today.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today with us and to participate in this conference with the subject as very clearly expressed already. Alice and Ariella also mentioned it, that the subject is often still taboo in Europe. On behalf of the, do you hear me? Yeah. Try to come nearer. On behalf of the European Jewish Congress, I also wish to thank our partners at Maaerten International and our distinguished speakers for contributing their expertise and intellectual honesty to this urgent conversation. And most of all, I would like to express our gratitude to our dear friend Alice Teodorescu-Magri for her courage, clarity, and leadership in hosting not only this discussion, but in her everyday work, in all her interventions on the subject. Alice, you are the most courageous MEP, I think, and we are so grateful to you that you will enter Europe as somebody who was always courageous and on the good side of the history. And at the moment when many people prefer silence, ambiguity, or political comfort, Alice chose instead to ask uncomfortable but necessary questions. Questions that many are afraid to ask, and which, when raised, are often met with indifference or condemnation by the authorities. That is why today I want to take this opportunity to express our full support for our dear friend, Professor Joël Kotek, who joined us this morning. And thank you, Joël, for being here, because I really want you to know that you have our full support. Joël was punished by authorities for asking difficult questions about very topics we are here to discuss. Professor Kotek was removed from Belgium's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and this is a clear example of the world we are living in. Ladies and gentlemen, for too long, Europe has spoke about anti-Semitism while refusing to confront one of its principal contemporary manifestations, anti-Zionism. It is not enough to condemn anti-Semitism in the abstract while ignoring the ideological engine that increasingly drives it. If we truly want to protect Jewish life in Europe, then we must have the honesty to recognize a painful reality. Today, anti-Zionism has become the accepted, fashionable, and socially permitted face of anti-Semitism. The term Zionism and Zionist is used as a substitute for Jew. It allows the collective targeting of Jews while maintaining its appearance of legitimacy. At European Jewish Congress, as European Jewish Congress President, Dr. Moshe Kantor wrote in a recent article, for years Jewish communities have watched anti-Israeli rhetoric increasingly crosses the line into outright demonization of Jews. When activists publish lists of Zionist institutions, including synagogues and Jewish schools, when crowds call for the destruction of the only Jewish state, when Jewish symbols are equated with oppression and evil, and when conspiracy theories about Jewish power spread online, the consequences are inevitable. Someone eventually decides to act. This is not legitimate political debate. This is anti-Semitism. And we must say clearly, Zionism is not a dirty word. Zionism is simply the belief that Jewish people, like every other nation, have the right of self-determination and security in their own homeland, where they can live free from persecution and hatred. To deny this right uniquely to the Jewish people while accepting it for every other nation is discrimination. Zionism is the belief that after centuries of expulsions, pogroms, discrimination, and ultimately the Holocaust, Jews should never again depend on the mercy of others for their survival. In stark contrast to the rhetoric often heard in the streets, Zionism is an anti-colonial movement rooted in the Jewish people's historic right to return to their ancestral homeland. When Israel is portrayed as the source of every global evil, and when terrorism against Jews is justified as resistance, we are no longer witnessing criticism of a state, as very truly explained Alice. We are witnessing the recycling of the ancient hatred under a new name. As the French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy recently warned, there is today in parts of the West a powerful desire for defeat, a readiness to blame Israel and the Jewish people for every global tension while ignoring the threats posed by extremism and terrorism themselves, and even a willingness to see the Jewish state eliminated by authoritarian regimes. And we cannot ignore the consequences. Too many people were sincerely believing that they are defending human rights, and they have been surely manipulated into repeating anti-Semitic slogans and narratives. The problem is not solidarity for Palestinians. The problem arises when solidarity becomes selective, when outrage becomes obsessive. And when Israel and extension Jews are uniquely demonized according to standards applied to no other country or society on earth. As the CEO of media group Axel Springer, Matthias Döpfner, said in a conference, it is not Zionism that is racism. Rather, anti-Zionism is racism. He was also correct to remind us that support for the Jewish people's right to safety and self-determination should not be a Jewish cause alone, but a democratic cause shared by all who believe in freedom and pluralism. Dear friends, anti-Semitism has always found a way to reinvent itself. Once it hated Jews for their faith, then it hated Jews as a race and as a people. Today, it increasingly targets the collective expression of Jewish identity, the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their ancestral and indigenous homeland. Jews are told they do not belong in Europe, they do not belong in America, Australia, and now the anti-Zionist movement tells them they do not belong in Israel either. What many of these so-called anti-Zionist activists ultimately offer is not a world where Jews can live in peace, but a world where Jews have nowhere they are truly welcome. That is why anti-Zionism, when it denies the Jewish people's right to national existence, is not separate from anti-Semitism. It is its latest incarnation. Thank you very much.
Let me also extend a welcome on behalf of B'nai B'rith to all our guests here today. Thank you so much for joining, for your interest, and perhaps especially to those not in the Jewish community. Thank you also for your allyship. It's a great pleasure to co-organize today's event with the European Jewish Congress and the Working Group Against Anti-Semitism. Raya, I subscribe to everything you've said and the way that you've laid out the discussion for us now. And I think our guests should know that for many years you had the clarity to see before many others did how anti-Israel sentiment and discourse was more often than not anti-Semitic in nature, and to name that without hesitating long before October 7th. This makes me think of a quote I really appreciated. Whoever attacks Zionism but does not wish to say anything bad against the Jews is either fooling himself or others. But jokes aside, let me join you as well in thanking MEP Maaerten for being such an outspoken and consistent and seemingly never tired voice against anti-Semitism, and for your leadership of the working group. And I'd like to also extend my solidarity to Joël Lecotek, with whom I have the great pleasure to work with in IRA, and whose expertise has greatly enriched the organization, but has also enriched Belgium itself. Now, I'd just like to dig deeper on one point that was vaguely alluded to already. What makes anti-Zionism particularly challenging is that those who spread it see themselves as engaged in a noble cause. They do not perceive themselves as prejudiced, of course. On the contrary, they often believe they are advancing justice, equality, and human rights. Jean Amery, a Viennese Holocaust survivor who, after being liberated from Auschwitz, made his home here in Brussels, named this phenomenon virtuous anti-Semitism. And I think virtuous anti-Semitism deserves examination because it helps us explain why anti-Jewish tropes, disguised as anti-Israel sentiment or anti-Zionism, can circulate so comfortably in mainstream discourse. Ameri was actually writing in the late 60s and 70s, but when you read his work, it sounds extremely contemporary. It sounds as though he's writing today. He's someone who diagnosed the phenomenon. Scholars such as Izabella Tabarovsky have helped us understand part of its intellectual genealogy. And as our panel will discuss, many of the narratives and assumptions that shape contemporary anti-Zionism were not accidental developments. They were cultivated and disseminated through decades of Soviet, amongst other, propaganda, which sought to recast Zionism, the ultimate symbol of the West, as uniquely racist, colonialist, illegitimate, while presenting opposition to it as a progressive cause. Those ideas outlived the Soviet Union. They entered international institutions, academic discourse, political movements, and eventually, as we see today, mainstream public debate. And there are a few people, I think, better equipped to help us trace this thread than our speakers today. So allow me to end by thanking all three of you for being here, for your work, and for your willingness to take what is actually the virtuous position.
Thank you very much, Alina. We will now move to our panel, and I'm really excited to present to you our speakers today. Each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes for their intervention, after which we will move to a moderated discussion and Q&A with when it is expressed in traditional or classical terms, like conspiracy, Jew loyalty, or Holocaust denial. The major problem, and Alice mentioned it, is that the language killing Jews today is most of the time not contained in this far-right glossary. People need to know what has contributed to the vocabulary now chanted on campuses or during march. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the Working Group Against Anti-Semitism of the European Parliament and its chair, Alistair Deraskomawe. Thank you to the European Jewish Congress, Maaerten International, and other co-sponsors for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. So my role on this panel, as has already been pointed out, is to illuminate the Soviet background of the anti-Zionism we are facing today. Why is this historical background important? It's important because, as my research shows, the language of today's anti-Zionism replicates to an astonishing degree the language of anti-Zionism that was developed by the Soviet Union in the last 25 years of the Cold War. Today's anti-Zionists equate Zionism with Nazism, fascism, racism, terrorism, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide, among other things. And they weren't the ones who came up with these ideas and with this language. This is what's so important to understand. This language was developed by the Soviet Union and transmitted to the global left and the post-colonial Third World during the Cold War. It's important to understand this background because the Soviet Union didn't develop these ideas as a fair-minded political critique of Zionism and Israel, or because it concerned itself so much with the well-being of the Palestinian people. It developed it as a tool of discrimination and oppression against its own Jewish citizens, and it developed it as a tool for mobilizing the global left and the post-colonial Third World in its struggle against Western democracies, and in particular against its chief Cold War adversary, the United States. So what I want to do in the very brief time I have today is outline some key features of this ideology and the key mechanisms through which it was transmitted. Understanding this background helps us put current events in proper historical perspective. Before I start, there are two things that are important to keep in mind. What I will describe in a few moments takes place against the background of systematic discrimination against Soviet Jews. The harder the anti-Zionist propaganda gets, the deeper the discrimination becomes. Eventually, close to 2 million Jews leave the Soviet Union. This history is exceptionally well documented. Number two is it's critical to distinguish, as others have said, between fair criticism of Israel and Zionism and the kind of propaganda that I'll be talking about here. this is one area where there is a lot of confusion and intentional distortion up to this day. And as you will see, what I'm talking about is not fair criticism. What I'm talking about is wholesale demonization that is grounded in classic anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. More specifically, it is a worldview that takes an older anti-Semitic narrative with a very dark history and translates it into the political language of anti-Zionism. What we're talking about here is an ideology that reproduces, again, in modern political language, reproduces the core logic, the key tropes and motifs and worldview expressed in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a fundamental text of anti-Semitic conspiracy born in Russia in the early 20th century. It alleges that Jews control the world, that Jews are simultaneously subhuman and super powerful. It equates Jews with absolute evil. It places Jews at the heart of all the world's problems and asserts that the only way for society to solve its problems is to solve its Jewish problem. The process of solving the Jewish problem begins with the dehumanization and marginalization of Jews and ends with anti-Jewish violence of a kind we're now seeing across this continent and throughout the democratic West. The anti-Semitic conspiracy theory embodied in the Protocols helped shape Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda. It continues to influence anti-Semitic thinking today. And one of its best known symbols is the image of a spider holding the world in its tentacles. Now, the Soviet Union officially prohibited anti-Semitic propaganda, but in the early 1970s, we begin to see many of these core themes become incorporated into its state ideology. And it did so, in essence, by substituting the word Zionist for the word Jew. So I would like to illustrate this point with a slide from the 1971 May Day parade in Moscow. Maria, could you show it? This one, yes. So let's look at this slide. For those of you who are familiar with anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, you will understand the implication. This is a May Day parade, 1971, an essentially socialist, internationalist holiday, right? So let's go to the next slide. As you can see, on the left is the cover of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, French edition, which warns about Jewish danger. This is precisely the kind of propaganda that the Soviet Union prohibits. So why is it that we get to 1971 and we see the slide on the right, we see essentially that same image, right? A spider holding the world in its tentacles, simultaneously subhuman and super powerful. The answer is in the words. It does so by substituting the word Jew for Zionist and by inserting it into contemporary anti-imperialist context. So the slogan now is not Jewish danger. The slogan is it's Zionist danger. Zionism is a weapon of imperialism, is the slogan that accompanies that spider. And that already probably gives you a whiff of the current conversation about Zionism. So from 1967 onward, Soviet propagandists and the KGB invest a massive amount of money and effort into developing a justification for their demonization of Zionism globally. They do it for geopolitical reasons, among other things because the USSR views Israel as a critical ally of the US, because the Arab states are critical Soviet allies. So they recruit humanities and social sciences scholars inside the Soviet Union to establish a pseudo-academic discipline they call scientific anti-Zionism. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the covers of some of the books that I just randomly took pictures of books that I was reading. There are many, many more of them. These are some of the titles. And these books have been turned into propaganda pamphlets. Let's go to the next slide. And as you can see, these titles are in English. What the Soviets are doing, because they view Zionism, remember the picture of the spider, they view Zionism as an ideology that exists globally, that controls the world, and therefore they think that they need to be fighting Zionism globally as well. And so you can see the titles: Zionism, imperialism, or instrument of imperialist reaction, Zionism as a form of racism. All of this, these are from the 70s and 80s. This Zionism counts on terror. You can see how familiar it all sounds. Notice again, it's in English. So the Soviets are translating this into dozens of languages and transmitting it around the world. The tropes of these books and pamphlets match the tropes of the Protocols one-to-one. So let's go to the next slide. In this table, you see how the Protocols talk about international Jewry, and how Jews control global media, world politics, world events, etc. And Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda essentially says the same, substituting the word Zionist for Jews. So they talk about the danger of international Zionism, how Zionists control global media, politics, how they manipulate world events behind the scenes. Again, extremely contemporary. So the Soviets invest very heavily into producing and spreading these ideas around the world. And I'm going to just mention a few channels through which they transmit this propaganda. So one channel is the media channel. So let's go to the next slide. Let's go to, so I just wanted to illustrate very quickly the tropes that seem so contemporary, but they appear already in the early Soviet propaganda. We won't have time to go through the actual pictures, but one is that Israel equals apartheid South Africa. Let's look at that very quickly. It shows essentially that the image on the left shows that international Zionism controls Israel and it also controls South Africa. Let's go to the next one. So Zionism is racism, that's a quintessential Soviet slogan that they begin to introduce already in the 60s in the UN. I'll mention that in a moment. So let's go, so the image on the left is the one that was projected after October 7th in New York. So you see how the slogans are the same. The image on the right is from Soviet propaganda. Let's go to the next one. Okay, Israel drags America into its wars. That was a whole big genre. This is an exceptionally contemporary slogan, contemporary idea. So there was a whole genre in the USSR. So let's go to the next one, and then the next one. Okay, channels of transmission. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so how the Soviets work through media channels. So this is an exceptionally well-placed, kind of big success for the Soviets. They managed to place as an anti-Zionist article in the New York Times. But this was just one example. They really worked across the world, in particular with left-wing media, which they often supported financially. But this is just one example. Let's go to the next one. There is the diplomatic channel. So this is what you have here is the long-serving ambassador to Washington, Anatoly Dobrynin, at the White House with Nixon. This is just here for illustration purposes. I don't know what they're discussing, but we know that Dobrynin specifically got instructions from Moscow to bring Soviet anti-Zionist ideas, to spread these ideas among the American political establishment on the Hill and the White House, and also to contact Jewish groups, progressive groups, and create division between them and Zionist communities, Zionist Jews. Let's go to the next one. The UN. The UN was a critical channel of transmission. The Soviets began introducing anti-Zionist language at the UN in 1965. In 75, it culminated in the adoption of the Zionism as Racism Resolution. But if you start to kind of tighten the focus, you see that all the way to the adoption of this resolution, there are forums at the UN that are adopting declaration after declaration, resolution after resolution, condemning Zionism. No matter what it is, it could be a women's forum, it could be a journalist forum. At the end, they're always condemning Zionism. So over a decade, this continues, and then after this was a major turning point. After that, all the floodgates are open, and it really begins to penetrate many mainstream groups. So, and then let's see. And then let's look at the next few slides very quickly. So here I want to show you one method of transmission that is, I think, very interesting and very important. The Soviets worked directly with left-wing groups, not just through political education, not just through campaigning, but through fun events, such as, for example, youth festivals. So here I'm going to show you, I'm going to ask you, Maria, to just go quickly through, so you see, let's stop here for a second, you see Angela Davis here. This is a World Youth Festival held in East Berlin in 1973. Angela Davis presided over it, obviously a global icon. So parades, dance shows, kind of a very fun event over a whole week. 750,000 people attended. So let's go to the next slide. I just want to show you, here she is with the Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova, who is very active in these circles on behalf of the USSR. The next one. See, this is just marches, parades, very international. The next slide. For Americans here, or for those who understand the reference, this festival was referred to as the Red Woodstock, because it was sort of young people having fun, you know, it's dancing, music, rock and roll. Let's go through the next couple slides. Next one, and next one, and then let's go to here. So you see, so here's what happens. In the midst of all of this bonding and fun, they introduce political ideas. One of these political ideas is the Palestinian idea, the idea that Palestinians are the new kind of bit, they're going to take the banner of victory from the Vietnamese. Let's go to the next slide. Yasser Arafat is here. This is when Angela Davis meets Yasser Arafat. You see, this when you introduce ideas like this within environments like big festivals, you have what sociologists call this collective effervescence. People really feeling like this is what all good people of the world think. If you are a good person, if you're a good young person, then you must be for Yasser Arafat. You must be against Israel. You must be for Palestinian resistance. Let's go to the next slide. And it's just one more example of the same. Okay, so let's see. Okay, and so examples of adoption by the Western left. So what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that by the early 70s, the global left is already speaking in this language. What we're hearing today is not new, okay? So let's go through to the next slide. You see, this is from a newspaper of 1982 that was edited by a British socialist named Ken Livingstone, who became very prominent in British politics and was very active until very recently, very close to Corbyn. So you see the equation between, this is 1982, the Lebanon War, so you see the equation of the Israeli Prime Minister with Hitler. The idea of the genocide is already there. Let's go to the next slide. This is, you see that Israelis are committing genocide. It's already here, so none of it is new. It's really important to understand, because this is how, in the wake of October 7th, this is why these ideas are revived so quickly. They're just there all the time. They're not gone. Or they're not invented on October 7th. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It's just another example, genocide. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's stop here. So I know that I'm probably running out of time here, so I think I want to jump to conclusions. So again, I want to say that Zionism and Israel can be criticized in many different ways. But it is this particular framing that is adopted. Over time, it becomes part of a broader ideological package. And if you're part of the left, you view yourself as anti-fascist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-racist, and anti-Zionist. Now, to be clear, additional ideas and theories emerge in the academy between the collapse of the USSR and today. New funding comes into play, new actors come into play. And remember what I said about it. This is conspiracist language that echoes the tropes and motifs of classic anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. It shows that it suggests that Zionism is an evil force, it controls the world, it's akin to that spider, and we will not have peace in the Middle East or globally until Zionism is eliminated from the face of the earth. Okay? And there is evidence, in fact, that Cold War writings originating in Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda are being recirculated today. That's what this last slide is about, but I'm not going to dwell on it. Okay. Conclusions. There are several key reasons that this history teaches, or key lessons that this history teaches us. This history teaches us that a significant part of the language we hear today did not emerge organically from contemporary activism. It has history. Much of it was developed, systematized, and disseminated by an authoritarian empire that once encompassed most of the Eurasian continent and viewed much of the post-colonial world across the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Latin America as its sphere of influence. Conspiracist anti-Zionists, the anti-Zionism that draws on the tropes and motifs of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory did not emerge overnight. It became part of segments of left-wing political culture decades ago and was transmitted from one generation to the next. Over time, it moved from the margins toward the mainstream, and as I noticed, other intellectual, political, and institutional influences helped reinforce and expand it. But October 7th dramatically accelerated its spread into the mainstream of our liberal democracies. It was able to do so because many of its underlying assumptions were already present. Number two, millions of Jews have already experienced discrimination under the banner of anti-Zionism. We can debate definitions of anti-Semitism, but the easiest way to understand the consequences of conspiracist anti-Zionism is to examine its historical record. And the historical record is clear. Whenever conspiracist anti-Zionism becomes a dominant framework through which Jews and Jewish self-determination are understood, anti-Semitic outcomes follow. Conspiracist anti-Zionism, the kind of anti-Zionism that draws on the logic of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, is incompatible with Jewish life. The developments we're witnessing today only reinforce that lesson. Number three, it should concern all of us that the language of a dead authoritarian empire continues to shape discussions of Jews, Zionism, and Israel today. Operating with this language when discussing Jewish topics is no different from operating with other inherited forms of anti-Semitic language. The language of contemporary conspiracist anti-Zionism incorporates some of the darkest and most dangerous motifs produced by the history of anti-Semitism. Soviet anti-Zionist propaganda was itself profoundly influenced by the conspiracist worldview of the protocols of the Elders of Zion and by themes that also appear in Nazi propaganda. We can criticize Israel, we can criticize Zionism. Democratic societies should be able to do both. But what we're witnessing today has nothing to do with legitimate criticism. It is the revival of a conspiratorial language that has already produced discrimination, exclusion, and violence against Jews. It is critical that we understand this difference. Thank you.
But I was at the now infamous University of Ghent for many years. I severed my ties with the university in disgust over the recent policies, in particular the anti-Israel boycott, and disgraceful honorary PhD for Francesca Albanese and a host of other things that I'm not going to enumerate. But I'm still steeped in academia, of course, so I'm speaking still from someone who has a wide experience at different universities. Now, next slide, please. If you have been paying attention to academia from a safe distance over the past 2 years, you might be forgiven for coming away with the impression that academics in general have arrived at a unanimous consensus on one thing. There's almost nothing that academics agree on except for this one particular claim that Israel is committing or has committed genocide in Gaza. You have more open letters than I can mention. Sometimes it felt as if every week there was another open letter that garnered hundreds, sometimes thousands of signatures, all from credentialed academics all over the world, mostly concentrated in Western Europe, but there's basically no university that escapes this predicament. Then, of course, at an even more institutional level, you have all the boycotts, where Belgium and Ghent University in particular is unfortunately leading the pack. Pack is a good word, probably here, pack of hyenas or a pack of wolves, pouncing on this small liberal democracy in the Middle East. Many of these institutional boycotts were justified explicitly by the alleged complicity of Israeli institutions in the genocide. So many of these universities have claimed explicitly that because of their collaborations with the Israeli army, that makes them complicit with genocide. And of course, these universities here in Western Europe, they want to wash their hands clean. They don't want to have anything to do with such institutions. And then, of course, this is probably the thing that clinched the case for many people. The IAGS resolution. This is an organization that I personally had never heard of before. I'm not a genocide scholar. I'm a humble philosopher of science. But in August 2025, this organization published a statement declaring officially that Israel is guilty of the crime of crimes. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to belabor the claim of genocide itself. I think it would be a waste of time. I think it's probably pointless in front of this audience. I mean, I have had this discussion with many friends, former friends. If you're interested, I wrote an essay for Colette, very extensive, a couple of thousands of words, debunking this obscene and absurd accusation. I want to rise to a meta level here, and I will try to convince you that this apparent consensus in academia is a mirage. It doesn't really exist. It is an effect of what psychologists call a spiral of silence. So because of ideological and social pressure that has been applied first from the fringes of academia, but as Izabella has already pointed out, this has now moved to the mainstream. The accusation of genocide is a very long-standing one, has been leveled at Israel from almost from the day of its founding. But now, of course, this for the first time, we see that it has garnered unanimous consensus almost among academics and even institutions. Now, this is a mirage. Unfortunately, I don't want to suggest that there's a silent majority of people who dissent. I think, I mean, I have to estimate, of course, there's a sizable minority of people that dissent from the mainstream view, but they don't know of each other's existence. And we're going to say a few words about the psychological mechanisms behind that. And so there's many more of them than you would expect based on all these official statements by institutions and organizations. So behind closed doors, many academics privately dissent. In public, almost none will say so. Next. Okay, just to give you one example of how dire the situation is at my former university. The current rector of my university, Petra de Sutter, who used to be a minister for the Green Party, she's very left-wing, she was rabidly anti-Zionist even before she became a rector. The activists, of course, were elated when she was elected because they thought, like, finally, and someone on our side, and she's gonna do our bidding now, which is exactly what she did. Apparently, still not to the satisfaction of the activists because they have kept on occupying buildings and committing vandalism, etc. But in an interview for the Flemish newspaper De Morgen, a couple of days or weeks after her inauguration as the rector, she said the following about the genocide in Gaza. This was actually, the journalist specifically asked a question about me, because I'm the only dissenter now, open dissenter in Flanders. So basically the question was something like, what should we do with a case like Maaerten Boudry, who's basically engaging in the modern equivalent of Holocaust denialism. She says, if that opinion, meaning disagreeing with the consensus on the genocide, becomes a subject of research, and people want to try to demonstrate that there is no genocide taking place in Gaza, that is a line that cannot be crossed. Imagine that. So she's saying that you cannot even investigate the question. This is a dogma that has to be imposed on the whole university, and dissent is absolutely not allowed. This is one of the reasons why I left the university. This is no longer an academic institution, but this has become an ideological madrasa, I'm sorry to say. And she's not even the one who imposed the boycott, that was the previous rector. But I mean, whatever you can say about the previous rector, he's actually still a personal friend of mine. She's far worse. So she doesn't understand anything about academic freedom. By the way, she also said the same thing about people who oppose vaccination. Now, I think vaccines are one of the best inventions of humanity. And like, I've always defended vaccination, but it's stupid. I mean, it's insane, even on their own terms, to say that people who oppose vaccination, who want to research the adverse side effects of vaccines, are crossing a red line that should not be crossed. So it's not just Israel, she doesn't understand academic freedom in general. I keep pressing this button because I think it will respond, but next slide, please. So there is a phenomenon in psychology called pluralistic ignorance. You may have heard of this term. The best way to explain it is actually by means of famous fable, Hans Christian Andersen's fable about the naked emperor, which of course everyone knows. Steven Pinker wrote a book about this, as all of Pinker's books are extremely well written and fascinating. So he wrote a book about what is called common knowledge, when everyone knows that everyone knows. In a situation of pluralistic ignorance, everyone thinks that they are the only ones to dissent from the main view. They are the only ones to believe something, but they are not aware of the existence of other dissenters. So everyone has private knowledge, but as long as the knowledge is not made public, you create a situation of pluralistic ignorance. And an everyday example of that is actually interesting. If you have young kids or teenagers, binge drinking is an example of pluralistic ignorance, because this is something that teens like to participate in, or apparently they appear to like it. But if you ask them in private, like, why do you do that? Well, I don't really like it because I hate the hangover and I have to vomit, etc. It's not really pleasant. But everyone else seems to enjoy it, and I don't want to be the party pooper, so of course I go along. But that's what everybody thinks. They're just not aware of each other's private dissent. This is exactly what has been happening, next please, in the context of the so-called genocide in Gaza. So the fable of the emperor, there's one little child that points out that the emperor is naked. And that's the moment when the spell is broken. So everyone pretends to see the beautiful garments of the emperor until the little boy breaks the illusion. Now, and this is probably on the next slide, I have been getting emails over the past 2 years from people who were actually complimenting me or like encouraging me to continue my work and saying, you know, I'm very glad you do this because I have been doing this from the 7th of October onward. Very glad you do this. I completely support you. So please, kudos to you. But please, 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 do not tell anyone that I sent you this email because I don't want to get in trouble. I have a family. I don't want to lose my job, etc. And at first, of course, I like getting these emails. Of course, when people say that you're doing wonderful work. But at some point, I was starting to get annoyed because it seemed as if I was the only dissenter in the Belgian and in the Flemish media, which of course meant that I was extremely exposed and I was ruining my academic career. I don't think I will ever get tenure at Ghent University, and at this point I don't want it anymore. But I thought, why don't these people step forward? Would there be a way for them to privately point out that the emperor is naked without having to step forward and risk reputational suicide? So that's what I did. I published an open call on social media. Next slide, please. And I invited academics to come forward and to testify anonymously about their heterodox views on Israel and the Gaza war. They do not necessarily all agree with me, so there's a range of opinions. But let's say, in general, they are dissenting from the mainstream view, and they think that there's a huge problem of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism in academia. Some of them were more on the fence when it came to the question of genocide or war crimes, but all of them felt that they could no longer speak up without facing severe professional consequences. So after a public call, first mostly actually in Dutch, and then but I published it in the Jewish Chronicle, my piece about it, about a couple of dozens of European academics stepped forward. They wrote in privately, and I published a piece in the Jewish Chronicle, and I'm going to give you some quotes. I cannot tell you their names, obviously, because they told me in private and in confidence. This is a senior lecturer at a Dutch university. I'm afraid to share my thoughts freely with my colleagues and feel restricted in my freedom to speak openly about this. Okay, that pretty much sums it up. Next. A philosophy professor, a colleague of mine, Belgian University. Critical voices are silenced through exclusion, dismissal, and sometimes even violence. In such circumstances, I don't feel compelled to express my critical thoughts openly. Next. This is very interesting. This is not just any academic. This is a vice-chancellor of a Belgian university. So one of those Belgian universities that pretends in public that Israel is doing horrible things and they should be punished and we have to boycott them, etc., etc. And then when you ask them in private, this is what he or she says. The Gaza mania that is currently prevailing seems to me a collective madness. The call to declare what Israel is doing a genocide is in line with this. So I cannot tell you who this is, but you have to trust me on this. It's a vice-rector, a vice-chancellor at a Belgian university. So you see that these dissenting views can be found at the highest echelons of political power at university. Next. Next slide, please. Why the self-censorship? Well, I think it goes without saying, but in case you're wondering, some of them will say explicitly that they have tried to make some public statements about the war in Gaza. One colleague told me that he signed my open letter against the boycott. Colleagues refused to even speak to him or even look at him for several weeks at the water cooler. And at some point he thought, like, it's not worth it. I mean, I don't want to be ostracized and shunned for the rest of my career. The quiet career drag, another academic noticed that when he did publish a couple of tweets on the war in Gaza, suddenly the university, the administration stopped publishing his prizes, his accomplishments, his published papers, etc. Young scientists with dissenting views, of course, have to be extremely careful because they're jeopardizing their career chances. Ironically, the ones with tenure also are in a bind because even though they're pretty secure, they're not going to be fired. But no one wants to be shunned and have to deal with this naked hostility every day on the work floors. This is actually one of my advantages, that I've never been wedded to academia. I always had a career outside of academia as well. So I feel that I have more freedom to speak up because I don't have to show up at the department every day and have to deal with that hostility because it's only human. Nobody likes to be hated by all your acquaintances and friends. I didn't keep track of time. I forget. Okay. Next, please. Let's go back to the IAGS resolution, because even there you can see that there was there's something fishy going on there. It seems to be a consensus among scholars in the fields. Okay, I think the IEJS, it's not that it's a sham organization. I mean, it does exist, and it seems to be, and there seem to be actual genocide scholars doing valuable work in that organization. But only 28% of the members actually voted for the resolution condemning Israel. 80 of the 600 members so those are not the ones who voted, the 600 members in total. Among those, 80 have origins or are based in Iraq. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Iraq is not really well renowned for its expertise on the genocide question. Many of these people even have the same surname, so there's something very suspicious going on there. If you read the document itself, I mean, it's of such a low quality. It actually does not contain any serious argumentation, no documentation, no references. It is basically a vow of faith. It's basically expressing, in my piece for Quillette, I compared it to the stolen election hoax in the US. I think that this claim that Israel is committing genocide is the left wing, the progressive equivalent of the stolen election hoax. Deep down, everyone knows that it's bullshit. But you have to say it, you have to bend the knee, you have to utter the words, otherwise you face professional consequences. It's not enough to say war crimes, it's not even enough to say apartheid or ethnic cleansing. No, you have to reach for the highest shelf and you have to condemn Israel in the strongest possible terms. The word Hamas does not even appear once in the document, except in one sentence that says, oh, they're not just targeting Hamas, they're just engaging in indiscriminate killing. So this is a deeply, deeply unserious document. But I guess there was so much pressure on the organization and on the individual members that they felt they needed to do something. They needed to take a stand and be on the right side of history. Next. How do we break this spiral? Well, it's pretty easy. Well, easy. The more people speak up, so every person who speaks up will lower the social and professional cost of dissent. If I'm the only one in Belgium, and I don't want to this is just Belgium. There's plenty of people in the US. I sometimes have a hard time explaining to someone like Steven Pinker that this has become a consensus at Belgian universities and that the director of my university says that this is a red line that should not be crossed. So no matter how bad it is in the US, it's worse in Europe. And within Europe, Belgium is one of the worst offenders together with Spain and Ireland. But there's a bunch of us out there who actually do agree, and I wish they would have more courage to step forward. I can never blame anyone individually because some of them have legitimate excuses. They do say that they worry about their career. In many instances, in at least 2 or 3 instances, they testified that their wife was telling them, please, can you stop doing this? Because it's not worth it, let others do the fight. We have to think about our mortgage, etc. We don't want to lose it, you need this job, etc. The illusion of consensus will hold as long as everyone keeps silent, and it will be broken as soon as a sufficient number of people will step forward. So if you're interested in the piece, it was published in the Jewish Chronicle with many more testimonies, and it was published on my Substack as well. Next. I'm going to end on a hopeful note. It's difficult to find any hopeful note in this discussion, but in my very subjective experience over the past couple of weeks, I feel when I published my piece debunking the genocide libel, it is a blood libel, dealing with all the bullshit about the Amalek furs and the human animals, all this stuff. It's so disingenuous, and I thought that I was getting a lot of pushback, and to some extent I was, but every Flemish newspaper rejected it, so it was only published in an obscure Australian magazine. But what I did notice is that almost no one was prepared to deal with the substance of the arguments anymore. I feel that many of these bullshit arguments about Amalek have never been retracted. They have just been quietly shelved, and nobody talks about it anymore. And the more I discuss this online, the more I feel that people are already backtracking. They're saying genocide, schmenocide. Why are you so hung up on that term? It's just semantics. Excuse me, hung up on that term. For the past 2 years, you have insisted that everyone had to bend the knee and utter that phrase, and now all of a sudden it's semantics. Or the second response that I'm constantly getting is so they're not dealing with the substance of the arguments at all. Just here's a list of NGOs and organizations that say it is a genocide. And now what about you? And I had a discussion, and I'm going to finish here, with a friend of mine a couple of days ago. I will not tell you who it is, but he's an expert of the Holocaust. He wrote multiple books on the Holocaust, and he to my huge disappointment, at some point said that Israel was engaging in genocidal violence in Gaza. And I told him, you know, this is absurd if you're honest with yourself. And I could feel that his heart was not in it. He did not believe it. And he was like, eventually I forced him to admit that by his logic, by his standard of genocide, the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were genocide, the bombing of Mosul and Raqqa against IS were all genocidal. Everything was genocidal. And at some point I felt that he doesn't even believe it. He has just been forced to take this vow of faith together with everyone else. And the sad thing, of course, is that he's not gonna backtrack. But I do feel, this is my little hope that I'm cherishing. The spell will be broken eventually, and I could see that people are already quietly backtracking and shelving some of the worst arguments. I think this is probably the penultimate slide. So next, this is just a general point about why universities should not be turned into ideological madrasas. Not just when it comes to Israel, but also when it comes to trans issues, transgendered, racism and migration, etc. So there's a number of other domains where universities no longer live up to their ideals and are rapidly losing the trust of society. Next. If you're interested in reading some of my pieces, so the ones that I already discussed, The Tyranny of Victimhood is about the roots of anti-Zionism and decolonial movements, people like Edward Said and Frantz Fanon. This is going to be in my new book, provisionally titled The Betrayal of Enlightenment, so you can find all these texts on Substack. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you all for coming here. About half a year ago, just before Hanukkah, I was invited to a reception at the Jewish Culture House in Stockholm. Maybe some of you have been there, and if you have not, I'm sure that you can imagine the security process to get in there. First the iron gate 40 yards from the building, then the building in itself like a bunker with small windows, and the windows being blast and bulletproof, and then 2 security doors. Inside the building, because it was just before Hanukkah, the children of the Jewish school were singing Hanukkah songs to us. They were 11 years old, and they sang in Swedish, English, Yiddish and Hebrew. And I tried to get my head around what they did to these children to make them sing in 4 languages. And then I stood there and thought to myself that these children are passing those gates every single day, Monday to Friday. What does it do to a child? Does it make them feel safe or unsafe? What does it do to a parent? You know, when you have children age 11, this is when you allow your children to stay away from home without you, to go on a field trip, to go on a camp, to stay over at a friend's home, and you know your child. If your child is a bit shy, you encourage him or her to take a seat. If your child is a bit wild, you make sure that they will listen and take instructions. What does it do to parents to pass those gates every day? And then at the end of the reception, the chairman of the Central Jewish Committee in Sweden, Aron Verständig, reached out to the Prime Minister who were present and thanked him and the Swedish government for all the investment in security around Jewish institutions. And the Prime Minister accepted and received the greeting, but it just didn't sit right with me. Not at all. The level of anti-Semitism that we are facing, our ultimate response is to lock up our Jewish neighbors in bunker similar situations. But we don't see it. Fighting anti-Semitism is not a courtesy that we do to the Jewish minority. It is a service that we do to democracy. A society that still upholds its anti-Semitism is a society where I will become who I prefer not to be. First of all, to give some context in how we conceptualize this new study, we have to understand that anti-Semitism is not about and was never about Jews. Anti-Semitism is about anti-Semites and their fantasies about Jews. And these fantasies have been meaning-making for anti-Semites over centuries. I arrived to this research from a social psychological and sociological point of view. I am interested in the history of anti-Semitism, but I'm more interested in how and why it conducts meaning to people. I don't see anti-Semitism as something that is deviant from human nature. It is a meaning-making process. The anti-Semitism that we talk about here today, that I prefer to name contemporary anti-Semitism, is not regulated by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Anti-Semitism, particularly in the Western world, is regulated by the Holocaust. How we address and relate to anti-Semitism depends on our relation to the Holocaust. Before 1945, it wasn't such a shameful problem to be an anti-Semite. Post 1945, particularly in the Western world, it has become very problematic to be an anti-Semite. So this creates what I refer to as the anti-Semitism paradox. On the one hand, anti-Semitism is most likely the least social acceptable form of racism. It's not good to be a racist. It's not acceptable to be Islamophobic or to be homophobic, but being an anti-Semite is like being Hitler himself standing next to the gas chamber. So it is absolutely socially unacceptable to be an anti-Semite. The paradox that arises is that because we all agree that anti-Semitism is terrible, that is the main discursive position, we set extremely high standard for accepting something to be anti-Semitism. Unless there is a suffering Jewish body, unless there is a person that has been brutalized, that has been chased away, unless we have Bondi Beach, we don't agree upon if it is anti-Semitism or not. And this is deep within the anti-racist movement, a movement that gave us terms like microaggression, minority stress, non-grievables. But when it comes to the Jewish minority, we don't entitle them to be believed when they witness about anti-Semitism. Okay. So, anti-Semitism, by its nature, depicts of stereotypes about Jews and conspiracy theories about Jews. That is, what Jews are and what Jews do. Anti-Semitism is also constructing the Jew as the ultimate opposite of the ultimate good. This is when Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, if there were no Jews, the anti-Semite would invent them. Because they need the ultimate opposite of the ultimate good. So when Christianity was the ultimate good, Jews were Antichrist. When the nation became the ultimate good, the Jew were the cosmopolite that existed everywhere and belonged nowhere. When the race became the ultimate good, the Jew were the anti-race. When socialism became the ultimate good, the Jew were the capitalist. When human rights in our era becomes the ultimate good, Israel becomes the collective Jew and the ultimate opposite of the ultimate good. And in order to uphold this discourse, sensing that you are a just person, you always have to allow this contrast to become a part of the good. So, when the Jews were Antichrist, we accepted them if they baptized. When they were the cosmopolites, we accepted them when they assimilated. When they were the anti-race, we accepted them when they were gone. When they were the capitalists, we accepted them when they became the revolutionary. And today, we have the slogans on social media and in the streets, real Jews are not Zionists. And this, from the depth of the anti-racist movement, a movement that is, during all other circumstances, very, very conscious about that the majority shall never tell the minority who they are or should be. But we don't mind saying, obviously, that real Jews are not Zionists. Okay, so after October 7th, and really immediately after, we realized that we will be hit by a perfect storm of anti-Semitism, so I summoned and set up 3 research teams to study the development of contemporary anti-Semitism as it unfolded in front of our eyes. So, and when we do study about anti-Semitism, when we try to measure the level of anti-Semitism, we usually make use of 3 different kind of sources. One source is incident reports, most often criminal reports, but also other incidences of anti-Semitism. The other source is experiences of anti-Semitism among the Jewish minority. And the third is attitude surveys. And in Sweden, as well as the entire Western world, the anti-Semitic incidences spiked after October 7th. The experiences of being exposed to anti-Semitism among the Jewish minorities spiked after October 7th. And then when we had the first attitude surveys, no difference. The first major global attitude survey about anti-Semitism after October 7th was published last year. And the level of anti-Semitism in the Western world was about the same as before October 7th. And as a researcher, you will ask yourself a number of questions when you have 2 sources spiking and one not affected. So either we have a very, very small minority of anti-Semites causing all the problem. That didn't seem to be likely. So then you put up a hypothesis saying that we are measuring the wrong sort of anti-Semitism in the wrong way. So we conducted a huge social experiment that is very uncommon in social science. So we pre-registered our hypothesis saying that we are measuring anti-Semitism in the wrong way. So we had 9,000 participants in our study, and it was conducted in Sweden, UK, and the US. When we measure anti-Semitism, we make use of different questions, constructs. We are asking, do you think that Jews are more vengeful than others? Do you think that Jews are less trustful than others? And this is scaled to what extent you agree or disagree. And you also ask, do you think that Jews control media? Do you think that Jews control the US government? And then an index is created depending on how you responded to these questions. And we realized, as the theme of the topic here today, that nobody on social media are talking about Jews. On the contrary, they would honestly say that we really appreciate, we have nothing against Jews, it is the Zionists. But the term is a void term, right? You fill it with whatever you want to fill it with. And this is the tradition of anti-Semitism. When the term Jew, the eternal Jew, is a void term that you can use to fill with any political message that you want to convey. So it is, and in academia, there are three positions concerning the relation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The two fringe and very small positions, one saying that anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism, another fringe saying that anti-Zionism is never anti-Semitism. The vast majority of us in the field, we say that anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism when it makes use of anti-Semitic stereotypes and conspiracy theories. So what we did was very simple, and I can't believe that anyone didn't come up with this before. So we took these questions that are used in global surveys for measuring anti-Semitism, and we exchanged the term Jew for the term Zionist. So we asked, do you think that Zionists are particularly vengeful? Do you think that Zionists control media, control US government? And we randomized, so half of the participants responded to the Jew condition and half of them responded to the Zionist condition to see what will be the result. The result confirmed our hypothesis that when we use this void term, Zionist, people are more aligned to agree. And the level of alignment is between 70 and 100%. So in other words, the measurements that we have about anti-Semitism concerns what we can call modern anti-Semitism, the form of anti-Semitism that ultimately led to the Holocaust, but it doesn't measure the contemporary anti-Semitism. So we're not measuring the true level of anti-Semitism, we are not measuring the nature of the contemporary anti-Semitism. This study will be published in academic journal, and those of you who are scholars know about the review process, but we have a preprint that was released yesterday in Swedish, and in a few weeks you will have a preprint in English. Anyone that would like to have this preprint, just talk to Richard there, give your business card to him, and we will send you the preprint. To conclude, in my studies, I interview a lot of Jewish youths, and to them it is not clear if they have been subject to anti-Semitism. They sense that something is not right. They sense that maybe I have been gaslighted, but I don't know. So I decided to put them together in focus groups, numbers of them, numbers of focus groups, just to talk about what it is like. And I opened the focus groups interviews not by asking, have you been subject to anti-Semitism? So you might not even know. So, since we have this anti-Semitic paradox, where we are obsessed by the Jewish body, is it bleeding or not? If it is, we accept it as anti-Semitism. So I opened by asking them, how is the status of your Jewish soul? And that made them all talk. And together realize what they are going through. And what they all said is that they have all been asked a question that they felt was a hostile question, but they couldn't put the finger on it. They had all been asked, what do you think about the Gaza war? With the emphasis on you. So the emphasis on you is what I call the structural anti-Semitism. It is not anti-Semitism by intention, but by its outcome. Making your Jewish friend, your Jewish peer, slipping away from being a competent subject, that you can talk about anything, and you know that your competent subject there will respond in accordance with his or her own convictions and reasons. But what do you think about the Gaza war is making that subject then into the Jewish object, controlling, are you the good Jew or not? I don't want to hear about how you are affected by the Gaza war. That would be the sensible question, right? Jewish people very often have a relation to Israel, and people having a relation to a country in a state of war, you ask them, how are you affected? But when you ask, what do you think? You're making sure if this person is the good Jew or not the good Jew. And this is structural anti-Semitism. The contemporary anti-Semitism is regulated by our relation to the Holocaust, but it is activated by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you.
The wave, especially on social media, right, of these kinds of accusations, is that I think it's completely legitimate and I think advisable to ask yourself who is saying it and why are they saying it? What is the purpose of this communication? It's like Dr. Mattson just said, are they just trying to accuse me? Is it just a gotcha? You know, you can write a post, you can comment under their post, giving them a full layout of the facts. But is that what they're looking for? Are they looking for the facts? You know, they know the facts. The facts are there, anyone can find them. So I actually believe that for most people, it's not productive to get into discussions with anti-Zionism, with these posts. Because, you know, their own policy is not to engage with people who think differently from them. So trying to de-radicalize someone who refuses to be de-radicalized, it's a very specific form of communication. I think most of us should be focusing on speaking to people who are open to engaging with us. You know, people who aren't there to just do wordplay with you, to play narrative games. People who are genuinely coming to you and saying, what do you think? And you will know the tone of that communication. It will be very different. When people are truly open to hearing you, that's when you can lay out facts, explain, you know, discuss, and you will know that they're engaging with you. I think as a Jewish community, by the way, I think that that's where we should put most of our resources. Because we're spending so many resources on trying to convince people who are unconvincible. I think we should be speaking more to people who can be convinced.
Career, whatever. I am a member of Spotify Safety Advisory Council in New York, where we are to advise Spotify how to make sure that their platform is safe. And in our last session, we were introduced to the newest version of their AI, and we got into a discussion how the AI should be able to separate truth from lie, propaganda from information. And we're about 15 scholars there, and the majority of them are having computer science background, and just a few of us, I think 2 of us, have a behavioral science background. And they immediately started to discuss how the AI was able to do this, and I was thinking, oh my God, we are handing this technology to people that understand technology but don't understand people. People don't mind being lied to. We like to be lied to. We wouldn't even exist if we wouldn't accept being lied to. You have all heard, you are the most beautiful person in the world, and you are not. Most of us are not even the most beautiful person in the block where we live. But still we like it. We like these little lies. So engaging in a debate with a void term is making that term a reasonable term. The debate in itself creates a sense of reason to keep debating. What you can do from a social psychological point of view is assisting them in understanding and seeing themselves. Not seeing my argument, but hearing their own argument. Only when they discover that the term is void. And how you should do it, you will find your own arena doing this. Doing it in public is usually not very good because it is very revealing to them and people don't like to be revealed like that. As an ethnographer, I've taken part in these pro-Palestinian rallies and listening to their chants. And because I'm a researcher, I'm very curious what they mean when they say cross the Zionist, and wipe it out. And then I said, what do you mean? Exactly. Well, I mean that, and then I start asking questions, okay, and how will you do then, and what will happen then? And all of a sudden they see themselves, and no, this is not what I mean, but it is what you said. So this is how you encounter people that have been a part of a manipulative movement with a void concept. Yeah.
Perhaps just a brief addition. My strategy when dealing with these egregious double standards. So, for example, I have never seen any placards on campus calling for a Russian-free campus or something like that. I've never seen Russian people accosted on the street and forced almost at gunpoint to say, what do you think about the war? Can you condemn Putin? I've never seen the same thing happening with Turkish people, even though they're occupying Cyprus. I've never seen the same thing with Chinese people. Why is it that you're only singling out this single country? If you're so if you're so sincere in your belief that there's not an anti-Semitic bone in your body, why is it that this one state that just happens to be the only Jewish state in the world, that you're so obsessed with it, and that you condone the type of behavior that you wouldn't even think of, like even comparing the Israeli flag, for example. I mean, walking around in a city like Ghent or Antwerp with an Israeli flag, it would literally not survive 5 minutes. You could walk around with the Hezbollah flag, with the Russian flag, with an ISIS flag here. People wouldn't even pay attention. The only flag that is absolutely out of bounds is the Israeli one. Why is that? Why is that you can even walk around with a terrorist flag and not with that of a single country that happens to be also a little democratic country? I feel that many people actually have not even pondered the question, even though, of course, the right-thinking people are also against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and so I am. Like many of these people, of course, are in agreement with me when it comes to this particular issue. That's a no-brainer, of course. Like it was completely unprovoked. But even when it comes to the war in Ukraine, we don't hold individual Russian people responsible. We don't call for a Russian-free campus, etc. So there's something going on there, and I feel, in my experience, that this helps more than just pointing out a whole laundry list of facts about how Zionism arose and blah blah blah, and 1948 and the UN resolution and the 6-Day War. These facts are indeed available. I mean, people are aware of them or should be aware of them, but it helps more to focus on the selective outrage and obsession, I think.
The court cases that Alice mentioned, I served as an expert witness in those court cases, and there's a number more coming up where I will give expert testimony about what is anti-Zionistic anti-Semitism. And the discussion we had in court, it was like an academic seminar for almost 1 hour, talking about what is the meaning of the Magen David, the Star of David, and how has it been used in history. And as Alice said, the verdict was that they said, Dr. Mattson's testimony is correct. This is anti-Semitism. So they agreed. I convinced them this is anti-Semitism. But this is not generally understood. And it is said in relation and criticism to the war in Gaza. Thus, it should be allowed. So, definitely we have a huge educational task ahead of us. And it is so utterly boring when you come from the background of education, but still, even if it is expected, if we cannot educate about this and not by law regulate it, we are really on thin ice, and I believe that we are on thin ice, but we need to do the same sort of teaching that we've been doing will not solve the problem. So first of all, we have to address each form of racism by its own logic. The idea that has been implemented, not at least from policymakers in the European Parliament, having action plans against racism won't do. Each form of racism must be understood by its own logic, where it is manifest, and how it shall be tackled. You cannot combat anti-Semitism in the same way as you combat homophobia. That is as stupid as preparing an omelette by the recipe of a golonka and expecting to have an omelette. It won't help. You have to understand the specificity of anti-Semitism in order to combat it. And to conclude, I was talking to Alice yesterday, and we are all both pessimistic about the situation. And I said many years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Warsaw by two survivors from the Warsaw ghetto. They were in the fight, they were in Miula 18 and got out as the last persons. And we returned there 2001. It was such an experience being there with them, and I asked them, what can I do in order to return your courtesy taking me here? And they said, you should do nothing. You should do two things. Tell the world when you teach them that we fought. We were not lambs to the slaughter. Those of us old enough, able to fight, young enough not to have children to attend to, we fought. Secondly, we knew that we were going to die. We knew that our fight was hopeless, but it was not meaningless. So it is dark, but it is not meaningless to do what is right to be done, even if the hope is vague.
Yesterday I've been thinking about, so you said what I wanted to conclude
sorry.
with. Because yes, it's very dark, and I think that all of us in our different capacities, I used to be a journalist, so I know exactly what the price is to pay for being pro-Israel and against anti-Semitism. And I also get a lot of emails every day from people, as you mentioned, who says, oh, I'm standing behind you, and I know that you pay a price, and this is so important, but I personally can't do it because it will affect my company, or it will affect my family, or whatever. And then I usually say, I was a migrant from Romania, we escaped communism. What are you afraid of? You live in a democracy in Europe. You will not be executed. You will not be put in jail. What are you afraid of? Why is it so important to be liked by idiots? That is a question that everyone should ask themselves, because that is not important.
Can I forward my emails to you from now on?
Please do. So I think that as a politician now, of course you can ask us as politicians, what can we do? But it's more important to ask, what can you do in your meetings on everyday basis, at the universities, in the kindergarten, at the family dinners? Don't accept this hatred to be normalized, because that is the main problem now. And I'm also scared of the testimonies from the universities, because if we can't have a discussion based on truth, if truth doesn't have a meaning anymore, then of course there are no lies either. And that is a problem from an academical point of view. It's a problem if you want to talk about education. How do you educate if there is no truth? So we must do those things parallel. We can't just talk about one thing without addressing the other thing, because otherwise the whole enlightenment, the ideas of the enlightenment are in danger now, and that is a threat against our civilization, I would say. And that is why this is a cause for everyone, Jewish or non-Jewish. This is not a problem for the Jews to fix. This is a problem for Europe, and it's a shame for Europe. So I'm very grateful that you came today, and thank you so much for all you do. Thank you.
So I agree on that count. I was embroiled in a controversy the past couple of weeks about the so-called manosphere. This is something that was on television. I'm going to be very brief, but there's a rise of homophobia and LGBT intolerance in Belgium. And of course, the politically correct narrative is it's all the fault of the manosphere because the men are radicalizing, etc. All the while, they were turning a blind eye to the much more obvious cause of this intolerance, which is of course the Muslim minority and religious fundamentalism in general. But in the context of that manosphere, what is sometimes misunderstood is that there's indeed a divergence between men and women among Gen Z. But it's not because the men are radicalizing, it's because the women are radicalizing, mostly. I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit. But you see that many young women have shifted quite substantially to the left on many of these issues, and the Gaza war is just one of them, but also when it comes to gender issues, etc. It is indeed becoming very cult-like. I mean, what is really creepy in the video that the gentleman described in Barcelona, this turned out to be a professor or somebody with a PhD, I think, two PhDs?
Yeah.
Okay, so the glee that you can see on her face, she really enjoys this. She has found a way to demonize a minority group while feeling good about herself, because of course she's against racism, but finally she found something within her warped worldview. She's just smirking and like, no, you're a Zionist, like, we're not gonna allow you here. It will be very difficult. I do think it's not generational, it's mostly young women that are highly educated, of course, at universities. I think as soon as you go away from universities, that's also why I'm not surprised that this young lady has a PhD in some, whatever, probably some critical studies or fat phobia or one of these new studies, small fields. How do we get them out? Well, I hope sometimes it's just a youthful phase, and some of these people will come to their senses after a couple of years and being removed from university. I also think that it makes them completely, I mean, if you have all these radical ideas in your mind, it makes them unhappy. There's also some evidence that young women in particular are suffering from a lot of anxiety and depression, because if everything is a microaggression and you're constantly feeling aggrieved, etc., and then you have to lash out against Jews just to feel better about yourself. I don't have any specific remedy about exactly how to get them out. I've had discussions with some of them that were really fascinating, because the hatred was just so palpable, and it's something that you usually associate with men. Of course, men are violent. I never feel physically threatened, obviously, when I'm talking to a young woman, so that's not the issue. But the hatred is very concerning, and I don't really know how to solve it. And I can sense it when I was still teaching at my university, that some of these young women have been, completely, their minds have been completely hijacked by this ideology.
Thank you very much, Maaerten. I think